Hello my gorgeous lot, it's Mega Gran here again with another episode from my vintage story. Now then, if you saw my episode last week, you'll know that I made this cute occasional table. I sat a plant pot on it, as you can see, and put golden poppies in it, and I thought it looked absolutely gorgeous. Now, working on this delicate little table didn't make me any more careful with my tools, as you can see. That made me quite jump, did that? But it didn't take me long to rectify it after retrieving the glass and popping it back in its hole. And it didn't take me very long before I was hankering after doing a little bit more chiselling. I wanted to make a dining table to go with my little occasional table, and I also wanted to make at least one chair to go with it. Learning from making the occasional table, I knew that I needed it up off the floor. So I got a couple of wooden blocks this time and put 2 blocks of limestone. I was going to make it out of exactly the same material because I really did like those colours. Although I didn't spend any time at all choosing those colours, it just happened to be what was available. But it worked out really well, and I wanted to use the same colours again. I used the same sort of design as my occasional table, so I needed that as a sort of a template. And I started chipping away in the same style. And as my chiselling got underway, I felt I could do it faster and faster. But that was a little bit too fast, and I'd actually poked my eye out of my face. I could not believe what I'd done. I must say I did panic a little bit because Or had spent some time on these little miniatures, and my face of course, and looking at the stones that I had nowhere near the colour of stones that he'd used for my face, so it was going to be obvious if I replaced it with something that wasn't there already. I would just have to confess the clumsy handling of my chisel and ask Or if he would kindly repair it for me when he had time. It was going quite well and I was coming to the legs. Now I found these quite complicated to do the first time around, but having done them once and having a template just there for me to copy, I found them quite easy to do the second time around. It was just a matter of isolating each of the blocks that was going to form the curve of the leg until I got it right down to the bottom, and then repeating that on all 4 corners. So it wasn't long before I had the legs done. Then I had to think about this chunky bit in the middle. It was far too chunky, so I decided to chip some of it away. I wanted it to look delicate, but I also wanted it to look strong enough to sustain people leaning on it, if you know what I mean. I know there wouldn't be people leaning on it, but you know, you've got to use your imagination and play along, you know? I quite liked that, although there was something amiss somewhere, and when I looked, I'd realised I'd taken 2 chunks out that should have been there. Then a little bit of decoration on the bottom, and I wanted this to match the occasional table, but it would have to be a little bit different along the sides because it was a different shape altogether. But I thought a line of that dark colouring would just look right for it being a dining table and not a little occasional table. The sides, of course, would be exactly the same. And I quite liked that. I liked it a lot. Now for the top, and I needed some height for that. I wanted the edge the same as the occasional table, and that was quite easy to do. And I wanted to maintain the shape in the corners as well, so it matched the occasional table, but was just pulled out into an oval. So rounding them off as much as you could round off square blocks worked very well, I thought. And the size of the squares that I took out needed to be reduced so that I could get that as round as I could. And I think that worked quite well. And the next thing I had to think about was the pattern on top. Do I just double what I did for the occasional table, or do I have a different pattern altogether? It was difficult to decide what I was going to do on top, so I just sort of went with the flow to see what it looked like when I dabbled about a bit. So I ended up copying the pattern that I'd done on the occasional table on both sides and then creating something different for the middle. When I finished, it was a little bit blocky in the middle, but I lightened it up by removing some of the colour that I'd already put in. And then there was a bit of putting some back and taking some out, and I eventually settled on something that I quite liked. There was a balance to get between the darker areas and the light areas, and I didn't want too much of either of them. And then it was done, and that didn't take me half as long as the occasional table did, even though it was twice as big. So next, I needed to place it, and I found that quite problematic. I wanted to place it along the side of the wall, but it just would not go. I carried on placing it and breaking it and placing it again and breaking it again, and it just would not go the way I wanted it. I felt sure it should be able to go in a different orientation, but I could not figure it out. And then I got interrupted. Once the storm waned, I went out to tackle the drifters that had spawned. There weren't that many of them really, and I was learning to tackle them better and better each time. I still hadn't built one of those drifter traps, and I knew I was missing out on quite a lot of the loot you could get from them. But, you could only do one thing at a time. Well, I could anyway. And this is what I was doing right at this moment. So I needed to get back to my table. How clumsy am I? I was hoping Or could sort that out for me. Well, I carried on trying to place this table in a different orientation, and it just wasn't happening. So eventually I just had to settle for it being in the centre of the room, which really wasn't the place that I wanted it to be. But hey ho, I would just have to find out how to do it. I could now put my occasional table back, complete with plant pots and golden poppies. And it made me want to put something on my dining table as well. The candles caught my eye. Could I put those on there? Why not? They were on the table already. They should be able to go on that table. Also I thought. So I popped them off the wooden table, took them over to my newly created table. But alas, it was not to be. Obviously, they were only made for a wooden table. So I had to place them back, and I had to think of something else to go on my delicious new table. What could I put on it? Well, it's a dining table, so maybe I should put some food on it. Maybe one of the crocs. And then I could just come up with my bowl and whip some food out of it. Yes, that sat on there quite nicely. Quite liked that. Next, I needed to do a chair. Now this took me a long time to do. I couldn't even speed it up to fit in this episode. So this is what I ended up with. It was a dinky little chair. In fact, the top could have been 2 blocks to make the back bigger. And I'd also reversed the colouring on the seat bit, where I imagined a pillow would be. But I felt there was a bit too much dark in the middle, so I replaced a few of the dark blocks with light blocks. When I looked again, this side was a little bit different, only I realised I hadn't come down there quite as well as I had on the other side. So I replaced that, and that little block there that shouldn't have been there. And that was it. I felt like I'd done my best on that one. I needed to try it out to see what it looked like. I mean, I know we can't sit properly, but we can sit cross-legged. How would that look? So I climbed up on the chair and sat down, like you can, cross-legged on the floor. And when I looked in third person, I thought it looked absolutely awesome. I loved the fact that I could sit there and I was at the right height to eat something off the table. I could just imagine it. That was awesome. I loved it. Well, it wasn't long after asking Or to come and sort out my face that he actually fixed it, and then said I could have done it myself. I thought, what? Well, if you hover over the block you're chiselling and bring up the interface, you'll see all the blocks that were used to make whatever it was you was making. I couldn't believe it. It was as simple as that. Wow. I also got further instruction on how to rotate my table and chairs. That arrow, that circular arrow, that was it. And I had used it, but it didn't work. Well, I clicked on the block that I wanted to rotate, clicked on the arrow, and then clicked again on the block as if I was placing something on it. And around it flicked. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it after all the times I'd placed it. I was quite eager to place it again now, in the right orientation. And there it went, perfectly. And then the other half, I just needed to do the chair now. So I set that down, did what I needed to do with it, and rotated it as many quarter turns as I needed to get it into the right orientation. And it was just then a matter of lifting it up again and placing it in front of the table. It worked perfectly. I could have done with making 2 chairs really, but as I'd made the width of the chair the full block width, if I put them together it would look like a settee with 2 backs. I needed to take the slice of blocks off on either end. I'd have to do that next time, and then I could place both chairs side by side and they would look like separate chairs. But I couldn't do it now. That was quite enough chiselling for one day. So it was back to my forge, and my clay bricks had fired, so I could now complete this bit where the axle came through my roof. And while I was putting in those upside down stairs, I did think that maybe a slab in between those stairs might finish that off a little bit better. And they were beginning to look like they belonged there. Looking in my inventory, I did find that I did have 1 slab. Obviously, I'd need to make more, but I thought I'd try that in, seeing I was here, and that was there, and it was just a matter of putting it up. So I knocked out the old slab, put the new slab in, and I thought that looked quite good. So I went off to get some more. While I was putting them in, I was contemplating finishing off the smeltery with decorating it. And I was thinking of all the things that were in my basement under my house. Most of that could have come across here. I was hoping to collect a lot of stone variants as well, and those could be stored down there. There would be a lot of them. I wanted the basement underneath the house to be for food only, and that made sense to me. It was sort of like a clean area and a dirty area, and I wanted them separated. So that would work out quite nicely, I thought. This bit was coming along really well, and I did wonder whether I needed to add more slabs to the underside of these to make it longer. I thought it might just do, just as it was. So I put the last slab in, and I thought I might leave it at that. I quite like the look of that. Yeah, I think that would do. Next, I found myself doing more chiselling, this time for some windows, but it was just a long, protracted job. I decided that glass was the option that I'd go with. But I didn't want to get rid of these. I thought I'd save them, just in case I wanted to do a chiselling frenzy and actually put frames in these. But I wouldn't be able to put glass in the frames though. Or would I? Maybe that's something I could work out in the future. Although I hadn't realised I'd got different types of glass in. But let's pretend we didn't notice that. So I started shifting all the things that were over in the house. Things that I thought belonged in a forge or a smeltery, whatever you want to call it. Certainly all the tool racks needed to go with all the tools in them. They don't belong in a living room. And I was beginning to notice the different colours in the skies that were appearing since we updated to 1.17. And there was another update imminent as well, 1.18. And that was an exciting prospect. But it was a bit sad as well because it meant a server reset. And when that was going to happen, I wasn't quite sure. So I was just carrying on with the things that I'd planned until that happened. But I think it would be fairly soon. So I'd get my racks up and I was getting my tools in my racks. In fact, I actually made some more tools as well. I just napped some out just to fill some spaces, to make it look full and busy. And I always found it difficult moving things to new places because I always forgot where I put things. So finding things to collect together was a bit of a challenge. But I always found them in the end. It just took a bit of time. There it was, the hoe. And as I hadn't napped for quite some time, napping out some tools to fill spaces made me remember what it was like right at the beginning. And I quite enjoyed thinking about how new and exciting it was. And it made me quite relish the thought of starting anew again. My thoughts were cut short by Orr, who had noticed the accumulation of snow on my bridge during the winter. And I had a solution that he thought I might like. And those were the boards created from the aged oak, and he had quite a lot of them. And he offered to place it on my bridge. and I quite liked them. They were a little bit darker than the wood I'd used for my bridge, but they also had this sort of green mossy effect on them, and I quite liked them. Back in my forge, I was making my basement a little bit larger. I just pushed this wall out 1 block. I'd put some trunks in and put some shelves up, and I'd moved across my scrap tools. There was so much more to move across though, and so many more shelves to build. And I had another thought that I'd connect this basement up with my other basement, which would create much easier access than having to go up and down all the time. So I took some cords from this spot and worked out where I needed to be in my other basement to connect it to this one. Once I found out where that needed to be, I made space for an opening. Digging a corridor between one and the other wasn't too much of a challenge. And once I'd got some light on the subject, I could see that I could make the task quite easy by placing blocks from within. I did have to get a little bit wet though to finish it off. And it was a perfect opportunity to try out the new breathing bar. That came with updating to 1.17. It would make working underwater a lot more challenging than it had been. But it really was the logical step to take. Because you can't really breathe underwater. We're not fish, are we? I worked out where I needed to turn in the corridor and worked on placing blocks to make the walls so that I could get rid of the water. I wasn't used to keeping my eye on that bar though. I mustn't forget that it's there, otherwise I could find myself drowning a little bit. But not on this occasion. And then it was just a matter of placing the blocks to get rid of the water sources. Which didn't take long, it was only a short tunnel. And with removing a few more blocks, I found myself joining up one basement to another. And I quite enjoyed doing that. It made moving things across so much easier. I made it 3 high though, I didn't want it to be cramped, and I made sure there was a lot of light in it. I didn't do anything particular with the walls, they were just dirt walls. But I made sure it was quite light and unspawnable. I made sure there was proper doors on each end that fitted well. There was only 2 stairs to add, so I added those, and that was more or less done. Well, it was now high time that I moved into the Bronze Age. I'd been helping Or lay a path to the cursed lake, and every so often we put our prospecting picks to good use, just to see what we could find, and on this occasion we found some ultra-high cassiterite. It was 0.2%, so it probably meant that it was a good quality, rather than loads of it. So I marked it and came back to do some mining. It was quite a big scary hole down there, so placed quite a few torches around, and decided I'd rather dig in the side and mine down with ladders to find it. But I thought I'd light it up a bit first. I did notice my wheel going slightly anti-clockwise, and I did find that a little bit worrying, because if it was doing that at this level, I'm not quite sure what it would be doing as I was going down. So I'd have to keep my eye on that. So in I went, and sure enough, the deeper I went, the faster my wheel went backwards. But I was fortunate in that I didn't have to go that far before I found iron. Iron would come in useful later, but it wasn't what I was after right now. It was the tin underneath it, and that was absolutely fantastic. I had tin and I had iron. So as quick as I could, I started digging, and I tried to dig as much as I could, as quick as I could, because my wheel wasn't slowing down at all, and I was thinking I'd have to go down even further to get it all. Well, it wasn't long before I were having to recover my temporal stability. My wheel was going crazy, but I was determined to leave it as long as I could and get as much as I could before I had to go up. I had a thought that if I made a staircase up through the hill, as I climbed higher, my temporal stability would recover. I needed to try that out. And I was correct. As I made a staircase as high as I could through the hill, my temporal wheel went forward instead of backwards. so I just rested here until it recovered and then went back down again to dig some more. Needless to say, this turned into a long mining session. Back home I wasted no time in smelting everything up. I used 20 units of cassiterite with 180 units of copper, and that would make me 1,000 units of tin bronze, which is enough for an anvil and a pick. And I was soon pouring it out into the mould. The anvil took quite a long time to fill, but it seemed to take an age before I could see the molten bronze inside it. But it was there, it was filling, and it finally emerged. And that was so satisfying, after all the hard work of finding it and mining it. And I just had to wait now, until it cooled. In fact, while I was waiting, I thought I could smelt up some more. The more bronze tools I had, the quicker I could get things done. I had my pick and my anvil, and I could move on to the Iron Age. But I made more bronze. I quite liked the idea of having stronger tools, and I couldn't wait to get to the iron tools. But first things first, and I made sure I filled my axes up first. What an awful lot of chopping I could do with these axes. And of course I needed a hammer. And then my shovels. Those would last a while. And of course I wanted a prospecting pick. I did use that a lot. And I also had some left over to make some ingots. So in the next episode, I shall be rushing into the Iron Age. And I think it's time for a tour, so you can see what everybody's been up to. By then, I think we should have some news about when we're going to update to 1.18. So take care everybody, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.